King P here.
And Steely07.
And welcome to another episode of This Week in Metropolis. On this episode, we have Markus Birdman, who's a seasoned comedian of the last 20 years. He tells us a little bit about how he got started and his experiences in the world of comedy.
Hope you enjoy.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you to This Week in Metropolis.
Once again, as Matt already said to you, thanks for joining us on our podcast. For our listeners and viewers, we've learned a little bit about you over the past few weeks since we've been talking, but for our viewers and listeners, tell us about yourself and about how you got started into stand-up comedy.
So I've been doing stand-up for 20 years, I suppose. I started in 2021, I suppose, actually. And so prior to that, really, I did a bit of graffiti poetry and then performance poetry, having been in bands, and I was kind of wrote lyrics and stuff like that, and then got into performance poetry. And from that, kind of got into doing stand-up. So a friend of my then partner worked in comedy and came to a performance poetry sort of scenario and said, I think you're funny, you should try stand-up. And I was like, no way, that's scary. And sorry. And then she entered me into a competition, So You Think You're Funny, which I think still goes, does it? I don't know. One of those sort of new act competitions. Yeah. And I ended up doing okay and getting into the final in Edinburgh, but doing kind of performance poetry. So I kind of, and I'd never really been exposed to comedy before. I kind of figured, I don't know what I thought comedy was really. I just thought it was sort of men moaning about their wives or whatever. I've come full circle enough.
No, you fulfilled your destiny.
Yeah. But I think when I went when I went to Edinburgh, and there were a few people who were also comedians who were crossing over and doing performance poetry gigs. Maybe I'm trying to think of someone like Owen O'Neill or Dan Antopolsky, Stuart Lee. Simon Munnery, some of the perhaps more left of centre comedians who I met them and they were kind of going, oh, you can make a living as a comedian. And, I was at art college, I was in bands, I've sort of, as a poet trying to live a creative life and really never getting that off the ground financially, at least. And here I was being told that, you could make a living out of stand-up, really. So I sort of dipped my toe in the water and just sort of never really looked back.
Did you, when you started moving into comedy, and you said you didn't really have a lot of exposure to it there before, did you then do research as such? Did you sort of then start
a little bit
picking out comedians and thinking, well, let me try and work this thing out and how I can fit into it?
Yeah, I suppose a little bit, but I mean, I've never been a student of comedy. Yeah. I don't know whether you guys are yourselves, but you speak to certain comics and they're like, it's been their world since they were, a teenager or whatever. Maybe that's a generational thing for a younger generation. But my generation, I think I wanted to be a rock star, and so that my first exposure was probably Eddie Murphy.
Yeah.
And then Bill Hicks, perhaps.
He's my all-time favourite, Bill Hicks, and I'd say he fits into a rock and roll star as well in terms of his performance.
Yeah, and I suppose became more famous than comedy, so that he was kind of like, as did Eddie Murphy, really. He transcended that, so that you didn't need to be interested in comedy to kind of hear about them. But I still, so to answer your question, when I started doing comedy, I think I was like a sponge in terms of like, watching other acts. And of course, certainly when I started, I was doing 5-6 gigs a week. I would watch my fellow acts. But I didn't really sort of go and sort of hoover up back catalogues of people's, not really. And I still don't really. I've still never been that obsessed with it, particularly as an art form in and of itself. For me, it's been a way to live a creative life. I'm not like sold on being a stand-up, you know.
Yeah.
It was a way to make money and live a creative life.
Yeah.
If I could have made money out of being in a band or painting, I probably would have done that. I don't see them as really like, you know, it's sort of, without wanting to sound overly pretentious, but I think probably you are creative or you aren't, and it just kind of depends what weapon you pick up, really.
Yeah.
You know?
It's just self-expression in varying forms.
Exactly.
Such,
And comedy was the line of least resistance, really, or the one where you could make money, because it's a popular art form as opposed to some of the others, which tend to be a lot more sort of marginalized and certainly less money in them.
Yeah.
And there's so many different styles of comedy as well now. Like through me, I mean, I'm mid-30s now, and through the comedians that I've grown up, I mean, I probably started with people like Lee Evans, watching that. My mum and dad absolutely loved him, and it was kind of a bit slapstick, kind of that sort of comedy that he'd do. But the main thing for him was also the story that he told in his comedy, where you'll have other artists who are kind of one-liners and them sort of jokes. Did you find yourself trying out different styles, or was it always stories? Because a lot of your stuff, having watched some of it, is very much kind of life experiences and things like that. Certainly your more recent stuff that I've seen. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you know, that's an interesting question, because when I started, I wanted to be Eddie Izzard. I think that was my sort of influence, and he was probably currently on the ascendancy. And I loved that sort of surreal kind of, and the sort of artiness of it and the left fieldness of it. And I was very beguiled by that. And I think when I started, I was much more like surreal, for want of a better word, and tried to, and I was very influenced by people like the Boosh and Dan Antopolsky and stuff like that. And I did a U-turn in about 2004 after doing a fairly disastrous Edinburgh show that I realised that wasn't me, you know, and like I would only get me yay far by sort of aping someone else's style, really. And you know, I think it's interesting, because I now sort of teach comics, and you know, it's the difference between wearing someone's influence. You know, same with music. You know, you like fine for someone to sound a bit like the Rolling Stones, but it's not fine to pretend to be the Rolling Stones. You know, you have to, you know, and I sort of, again, without wanting to sound overly pretentious, I think it's that sort of, if you're really trying to sort of pursue any art form, it's like peeling the onion and trying to get to the best or purest sense of yourself.
Did you feel it was a wake up when you was doing that style? Was there something inside that was thinking, well, this doesn't quite fit? Or was it really the realization, like, I don't know how you described the tour as, or that particular amount of shows as disastrous? Was it that sort of wake up as to, maybe I'm doing this slightly wrong as such?
It felt, well, part of the proof was in the pudding, that no one was coming, so that felt like I was doing it.
Always awkward.
That's not necessarily true, actually. You know, but just because you're not popular doesn't mean you're doing it wrong, you know?
No, of course.
The opposite is not true either. Just because you're really, really successful, it doesn't mean you're doing it right. But, I found, if I can kind of rethink my process, I think, so I had sort of fairly weird, surreal sketches, and that were perhaps non sequiturs, but little routines. And I tried to put a through line or a narrative between each point, between each of these sketches. So one sketch, I can't even remember what they were, but let's say one was a sketch was about eagles, and another one was about cabbages, and a third one was about snooker. You know, all being quite bizarre and weird. They weren't, but I don't know.
I was going to say, what would be the theme?
And I think my explanation from getting from snooker to cabbages was kind of logical and made sense. Whereas the actual routines were quite bizarre and abstract. And I found that, I think in retrospect, the bits where I made sense went over better. They
Sure.
felt better to me to be saying them, particularly under a. What's nice about Edinburgh Festival, especially if you do that, I'm sure you had the similar experience of like when you're playing to a full room and it's going well, your material isn't really. It's not a stress test. A stress test is when there's 9 people in, and it's really hard work, and that's when you see the weaknesses in your material. Especially over an hour, and it felt like the bits where I was making sense, even if not necessarily people weren't laughing or whatever, I felt people were kind of with me and I was present and actually sort of talking, made more sense. And the bits where I was being more abstract, I think I was literally talking nonsense. And that to me, I just kind of seemed, I think that sort of, and I'm a big fan of people who talk nonsense, from sort of Tim Vine to a lot of Eddie Izzard's stuff, particularly the early stuff. So I'm not criticizing that, but I think actually it wasn't me. And what I thought I was, I wasn't. And so I kind of started again, and kind of went, okay, well then what actually has been my experience, and kind of what you were saying, James, about that sort of my stuff now tends to be anecdotal, and I mean, they are pretty much 90% of what I say is true.
But what's good about that, Marcus, is being able to, as a father as well. I know you talk about your daughter and stuff. It's relatable, so you can laugh and joke about it, because they're all probably things that we've all thought or things like that. And that's, I think, in a lot of comedy, that's if you can relate to it as well and laugh about it, it's the two work hand in hand.
You hope so. I mean, I think that's. I mean, I suppose. If you're talking about, if I'm talking about my kids, you relate to it as a father or a mother, or someone who has a father and a mother and might in the future want to have children, or so it is a relatable subject. So you can find it funny, and that's great. Even if you don't find it funny, you can still get the through line on the sentiment or my fear or my anxieties about what that is, even if you don't necessarily find it funny. If I'm doing a routine about snooker and cabbages, if you find it funny, then great. If you don't, I am literally talking nonsense.
That's it.
And so, you sort of, and it just felt like I didn't want to be like, as I say, to go back to, not to put a hierarchy on what's good and bad comedy. I felt like I wanted to sort of say something. What that is, I don't really know. I mean, I come from, my father was a vicar, so I wonder whether it might not be a huge sort of psychological leap or psychiatric leap rather to sort of go, I want to sort of preach a little. I wonder what you're preaching when you talk about cabbages and snooker.
That's it. Do you find yourself when you're thinking of, or sort of coming together, bringing together these different stories and so on from life, do you find yourself in everyday life observing something and thinking that would work really well in a sketch? Is it that conscious a process that you're thinking, I'm going to put that in the back of my head because this would be good? Or is there moments where something awful is potentially happening and it's that guilty conscience of, this would be really funny, but I really shouldn't say this.
Is that one? Yeah, usually. I think I'm less, maybe when I first started, I was more obsessed by comedy and more doing the former of what you said, Matt.
Yeah.
Just like kind of magpieing on every experience. Now, I'm certainly more in that, like, oh my God, what did I do? Ding.
Yeah.
It's gonna make a routine though, so the trouble with that is that you can end up behaving badly deliberately
to get the stories.
Yeah, to sort of that's the sort of Bukowski effect, as I would call it. Behave appallingly, write about it, and everybody vicariously enjoys that. The other thing, it's interesting because as a slight caveat to that, another person said to me he didn't want to talk about his kids, a comedian this is, because he didn't want to get into that position where he was like going, say something funny, and I think I understood that kind of idea, and I think maybe I was resistant about just talking about my daughter or talking about whatever. And I think the trouble is I mean, as you know yourself, and I don't know whether you're a father as well, Matt, but
Yeah,
it's so all-consuming. You sort of go, how can I not write jokes about?
That's it. It's part of you and your existence, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. You try and write. My relationship to cabbages and snooker, to keep that one going, is this, and my relationship to my fatherhood and child and whatever is gargantuan. So what's the point of writing about this? So I think I had a similar. I don't know how much sort of stuff you said, but I did a show about having a stroke, which I'd had in about 2011, and again people were saying, how could you write jokes about such a serious thing? How can you find that funny? And again, my response was, how could I not? At that particular time, my whole being was screaming, stroke.
Yeah.
And so to write about anything else would have been preposterous.
Do you think it helped you with all of the things, sort of great and small? Do you think it's a healing process or like a process of navigating through whatever that event is that's happened by airing it?
Enormously, absolutely enormously. I think the what I've learned about myself by examining myself for stand-up has been enormous. I'm such a good bloke now.
What are you going to talk about then?
Cabbages and snooker, probably.
Yeah, I'm so level. I'm the all-round package. Yeah, I think it's interesting because I try and it's that Woody Allen, what comedy is tragedy plus time, isn't it? I think that's what he said originally. But that notion of I think it's particularly British comedy. It's not very interesting to talk about stuff that's going well.
Yeah, it's in our nature as Brits, I think, to
moan.
Dwell on that. Yeah, exactly.
And I don't want to, and if you come out and going, my life's going really great, my job's great,
so what?
I don't care. You coming out and going, my life's terrible, my sex life's appalling, and my boss hates me. Suddenly, I'm interested. But for whatever reason that might be, rightly or wrongly, but I think that is a British sort of sensibility, and so I think it makes sense to kind of slightly crawl through the bits of your life that didn't go so well, and not necessarily in a kind of sort of salacious way, but I think it's if you can be generous about certain things and sort of expose yourself, so to speak, I think an audience does respond to that. It's funny, stand-up, because you know yourselves. It's like it's on the one hand you've got to be kind of Promethean and the kind of person that everyone in the room would follow into battle, but you also, I think the best stand-ups are also quite or very vulnerable and sort of expose their heart, and those two things are almost completely opposed to each other, aren't they? Do
you find that reminds me of sort of something I've heard before about how and from sort of seeing documentaries about various comedians, how comedians shine on the stage, but often they're very sort of withdrawn as such in real life. Do you find through day-to-day interactions there is that expectation that once someone hears, oh, I'm a comedian, it's like, oh, tell us a joke, make me laugh, look, okay, come on, this is going to be brilliant. Does that happen?
Very much so. As you don't need to be told.
Yeah.
That's just something any comedian tries to avoid getting into that conversation with a punter, however well-meaning that might well be. I think, and as you well know, it's sort of counterintuitive because everybody assumes that a comedian is the sort of life and soul of the party, is the one who is the most gregarious, the most sort of loquacious or whatever. And actually, I think the absolute opposite is true. I think, you know, people who are loquacious, who are at ease with themselves, who are the life and soul of the party, they don't need to do stand-up because they do it in their normal lives. You know, they tick that box of getting up and showing, well, I'm showing off, that sounds sort of unfair, but they tick that box of expressing themselves. Stand-ups are the person standing next to that person going, well, I'm funnier than that. But you know, I could say that better and cleverer and funnier, but I haven't got the social chops to do it. And I think it's that energy and that angst and that anger, whatever it might, that frustration, that makes you a stand-up. You know, because it's an awful thing to do. It's it's a terribly frightening thing to do, isn't it? I mean, it's the most unnatural, scary thing. And I think the only thing that propels you to do so is an inability to do it in normal life. And I think most of the my ex-partner, hated coming to comedy because she just thought, who are all these useless blokes mostly who just unable to talk to women and unable to express or unable to talk about anything other than comedy. And it's like, one is more sympathetic if you are a comedian because you understand some of the psychology. And of course, they're more willing to talk to you because they're comedians and they feel safe. But yeah, comedians are social, retards, aren't they? Myself included,
well, I haven't got that impression, Markus. You seem pretty down to earth to us. But you said, based on looking on what you've done in your career as a stand-up, 11 times at Edinburgh Fringe, is that right?
Well, I think it might be more. I think I might.
Really?
I don't know.
But even down to where you've travelled around the world as well, doing gigs. What's been the highlight for you? Where's been the best gig that you've ever done?
Perhaps New Zealand. I think
you've done quite a bit over there, haven't you?
Yeah,
Australia and New Zealand.
New Zealand a fair few times, and Australia a load of times. I think again, one of the things going back to what attracted to stand up, not necessarily in and of itself, but because it affords a good lifestyle. I've traveled for work. I think it suits my restless nature to sort of always be on the move. A lot of people were like, I couldn't be a stand-up, I couldn't leave home. And I love that. I don't like this. It's been very strange with our current situation because I've been on my sofa for 8 months, more or less, as we all have. But I'm used to gallivanting around. And that's one of the things that really attracted me to stand-up, that they're, God bless the British Empire, there was English speakers everywhere and you could go and do stand-up. And I've gone to places I would never have gone to or been able to afford to, or at least afford to, not to be able to afford to go as often. And that's been brilliant. And a terrific experience all round. It's nice. So to what sort of, in short, everywhere's worth going to. I enjoy the challenge of trying to put my comedy across when it's not their first language or whether there's cultural differences. Mm-hmm. All of that I find interesting, amusing, and a challenge. And I think if you're open to that, by and large, that can be really rewarding. I'm lucky. I've seen very good comedians who I think are amazing, who everyone thinks are amazing, just get nothing in certain cultures. For some reason, what they're doing does not work in Holland or whatever, I think, but I've been lucky in that what I do doesn't tend to detract wherever I am, if anything, it might even go slightly better abroad because I think I probably fit into the archetype of what they think British people are, a bit sort of, I don't know what we describe, but if say someone like I'm trying to think of someone who would be English but not very English, English to us, but sort of someone in Australia or Germany wouldn't necessarily think was quite sort of archetypally English. Sure. But I think I do fit into that mold, so I make sense to them. So loads of brilliant places. I mean, I think to say New Zealand stands out. Australia is fantastic. Pakistan and India were incredible.
How did, on the stand-up, I watched it, if you mention it, how did something like that come about? Was it that you identified you had a fan base there, or was it just that, well, this is the opportunity?
And
yeah, that's it. Yeah. They did someone to rally the troops. Yeah.
I think, I mean, gigs tend to breed gigs, you know. So I think the Pakistan one, I was doing some shows in Singapore, and one of the acts was Pakistani, and was starting some shows up in Karachi, and obviously thought that I would go well there. So that's how that came about. That's usually how it happens, really. Like I remember one time I went to Sweden. I mean, by rote of the fact that Mark Watson, who I was at that point the same agency with, couldn't do the gig, so I think they looked the next one down the list, probably. And but that's fine by me, you know. Yeah. And I did some gigs in Sweden, and then there were some bookers from other bits of Sweden who went, "Do you want to come and do these gigs?" And then a booker was in from Norway, so do you want to come and do those gigs? So it sort of just proliferated. So yeah. I haven't really been very strategic in going about doing it. I've just sort of said yes to stuff, you know.
You mentioned the current situation in the pandemic. One thing we've been asking the guests that we've had on over recent shows, which haven't come out yet, but we've been saying how it's affected their what is they do. So we've had a musician on, we've had someone who's got their own personal training business. How have you adapted? Have you had to change? Are you doing gigs via Zoom and things like that? What's happened for you?
I've done a few gigs by Zoom, which I don't really find desperately satisfactory. I'm about to do Sarah Millican's tonight, so don't tell her that. You know, it's not the same. It's okay. It's better than nothing. But it's a poor relation. I've done a few, like we did these sort of drive-in gigs where it was literally like a drive-in. You know, everyone's in their cars. Fun to do once for the sort of anecdote,
novelty factor,
the novelty value. But you know, they're laughing by honking their horns, and it's bizarre. So, and then of course we're into the sort of realm of, well, the summer was like socially distanced gigs, which are okay, but then you know you are essentially playing to a room that's half full. So all of which are a bit unsatisfactory. So I've kind of given into that, really, and kind of gone, well, you're not gigging. So what else? So I've done a few things. First thing I make sort of little films, or I've been attempting to make little films and little sort of animations, which I've sort of had a stab at over the past few years. And there was a program called After Effects. I don't know if you know it.
No.
It's like the sort of Photoshop equivalent of animation, so it sort of happens in real time. So you can make animations and edit film and stuff like that. It's quite complicated, and lots of people had kind of said you need to learn this program. So I pretty much since July sat and did 5 days a week, 9 to 5. Learning that. It's like learning an instrument, you know. I've really applied myself to learn this instrument and done that solidly for a few months, which is good because it was kind of creative. I think it's good because I think I can use that for comedy now, and also hopefully when we go back in the future, just for sort of content or editing some of my own stuff or putting some of my stuff online or making funny stuff. And it's also been good because I've actually got a few jobs out of it,
right?
Not related to comedy. Like,
does it help because you've got that passion for art as well? Because you mentioned again a bit earlier about your before comedy, you was quite into your art and stuff and drawings and stuff like that.
I hope I have a decent eye for doing it. It's a different discipline, but I guess I'm sure it helps to have a certain eye for a decent image. Of course, it's a different application, so but there is crossover, so that's been nice. And it is born out of that, as you rightly sort of said. I have done art and have put some of that in my shows. And I think it's another extension on that realm of what I also do. Yeah, away from sort of straight stand-up.
Do you feel with the sort of the like virtual gigs aside, have you noticed any difference in terms of your approach to social media? Have you felt, well, I need to focus more on it because I'm sort of filling that gap of the gigs, or have you noticed a change in the reception to the things you're doing on social media?
I mean, maybe it's my generation, or I'm a little bit late to the party with social media and a little bit of a sort of reluctant convert to it. I begrudgingly completely accept that it's a sort of part of being a stand-up, well, it's part of being in 2020, isn't it?
Yeah.
Look at us now, but like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And much of that's good, as an example, look at us now. It would be much more of a ball ache to get this scenario to happen under normal circumstances. I'm not coming to Norwich, I can tell you. I say that, forgive me, I say that with great fondness for Norwich. But, so there are many advantages to that. And I think I don't want to be that old person of my generation sort of going, oh, blooming social media. It's like much of it is rubbish. But then I'm sort of the mind that 90% of everything's rubbish. So it's just like, and 10% of it's ace. So it's trying to find the 10% of it that's good. And because we're currently in social media and it's currently the kind of the new sort of TV, isn't it? Or the new whatever, new sort of speakies. It's kind of omnipresent. And everything is kind of championed. And I think perhaps it'll calm down and we'll kind of go, a lot of that's rubbish. But the best stuff is great. And I think it's trying to find a way to navigate a path so that I can do something that I find rewarding, that is current. Yeah. I don't know if I've done that, but that's what I'm attempting to do, and that challenge I find kind of creatively exciting.
One of the comedians I feel really sort of aces social media, I think he mainly does it on Instagram, is Bob Mortimer. I don't know if you've seen it. If you see what he does on Instagram, it's essentially pretending to be a really pretentious posh boy on a train. Right. So it's like, sort of like talking, and it's this ongoing narrative of a conversation between this person and his friend. You never hear what the friend says, but it's the one side of that conversation. Okay. And it plays on his type of humour, but it's different. So it's like you said, it's like a different channel to it. And I think that works brilliantly.
Yeah. Is that on Instagram?
Yeah, on Instagram. I think he's the real Bob Mortimer, if you look him up on Instagram.
So I follow Jim Moore, Vic. More because he does quite a lot of art as well. Yeah. So I sort of more followed him from that aspect, but I'll have a look at Bob Mortimer stuff as well.
Yeah. In the current age that we're in, do you think there's anything missing in comedy in 2020?
I think there's a lot of virtue signaling without. I think one of the, going back to what you were saying about Bill Hicks. If Bill Hicks would get booed out of the building now for being misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, etc. There's a really weird time to be doing comedy. Yeah. I mean, COVID, notwithstanding, because of this sort of cancel culture. And I remember really enjoying lots of comedy I didn't agree with, because it was lots of people's views that that was kind of why it was funny.
Yeah.
He was laughing at, you know, someone saying something, the worst thing, you know.
I completely agree with you. But Ricky
Yeah.
Gervais is one of my all-time favourites, and you watch his now, like even I watch his now and cringe with some of it because you go, "Are you sure you want to be saying that?" But I think he's even come out and explained that the joke isn't about what he's saying; it's about the context of it. And there's another joke that people aren't getting are the ones that tend to complain about it.
Mm-mm. I mean, it is, you know, it's interesting times, and I think it's good, you know, that there's a new generation and saying we don't want to hear this, you know, no one wants to hear prejudice or genuine prejudice or you know, it's great that a lot of that's being sort of thrown out, and there was a lot of comedians, white male comedians, if for want of a better phrase, not necessarily and exclusively them, but who were being lazy and should have just been put to bed, you know.
Yeah.
But I think the pendulum currently has swung too much, where it's like all you have to say is, you know, I'm a vegan, and it's like, you know, you don't have to make a joke about it, and it's like, no, you're a comedian, you're not a social commentator. You have to make a joke about being a vegan, whatever that, you know. And it's like, not just saying I'm a vegan isn't good enough in our. It's like, I don't know. It's sort of so that's what I find kind of irksome currently, and I think it's that sort of not. And what Bill Hicks did that was wonderful. I think early Bill Hicks. I think Bill Hicks did actually become a bit too obsessed with sort of porn and kind of. But I think some of the earlier stuff, where he's sort of talking about the military and talking about kind of people not selling out to Coca-Cola and whatnot, was incredibly pertinent. But he was vicious. You know, he handed people their backsides for, and you cannot do that now. Because everybody goes, oh no, you mustn't, you know. So no one's speaking sort of truth to power. Now that's, as I say, that's not necessarily what all comedians should be doing. Because there's plenty of comedians, from Lee Evans to Tim Vine, who I love, who do talk nonsense, you know. But I think it's almost like that the sort of the political correctness now is like, yes, it stops maniacs saying horrible stuff, but you're also stopping intelligent people criticizing the current status quo, and that's not good. It's not good for comedy, and it's not good for society. So I think that's what's missing. And I'm not saying that's my role to be doing that, or I've been censored, because I wouldn't hold myself on that pedestal that's I'm not speaking truth to power particularly, but I hate this notion of sort of virtue signaling, which I think is quite current at the moment.
As a comedian who's been doing stand-up for, like you said, 20 years, has there been a moment during that time where you've thought, I've made it as a stand-up?
Well, one has to define made it, right?
It would just really be, from your perspective, almost like you've been working very, very hard for a period of time and you thought, this is paying off, or well, I'm quite good at this now. That sort of thing, not necessarily financially or you know, awards or anything, but just that almost you giving yourself a pat on the back as to, all right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, loads. I think. I mean, essentially, it's a kind of weird. It's a weird thing, the stand-up, because you're cheek by jowl with people who are, you know, you're perhaps in any other job. You know, if the people who are the people who really what you would term successful in terms of, you know, MDs or the kind of hedge fund, whatever, they're not going to mix with the kind of the journeyman of their industry.
Yeah.
But stand-ups, you know, we're all doing the same gigs. Even if you're a Hollywood star, you're coming back to play some rubbish little gig to try out some new 10 minutes. So you always do gigs with the great and the good, you know, whatever level you're at. And sometimes it's going to be quite sort of galling if you go out and do better than someone who's a Hollywood star or a TV name, because you realize that it's not about the talent. It's a lot of it's, I mean, whatever it's about. A lot of it's about luck. A lot of it's about sort of the trends, and it's certainly, it's, you know, success in terms of like fame or notoriety and financial is not based on how good you are as, you know. Federer's the best tennis player because he keeps winning all the tournaments, you know, not because everybody says he is. It's because he keeps winning, right? That's not the same in stand-up. It's a sort of, you know...
you're only as good as your last show. Is that sort of what you mean?
Well, you're as good as people's perception of you, really. Yeah. You know, Federer isn't as good as people's perception of him. People, you know... some people think he's an idiot. I mean, not, you know, or whatever, but it doesn't matter. He can still go out and win. It is a thing that I think you can tear you apart as a stand-up. You know, if you go to sort of, oh, I haven't made it because I'm not famous, and that's like, I can see that, and I've wrestled with that, and I do continue to wrestle with that. A little bird might, you know, in the middle of the night. But you also have to sort of go, you know, I've never had a proper job. I've got you know, I bought a house, 2 houses actually. I have a daughter, and I've done that by writing jokes. I've been all over the world. So you sort of go like, I have made it.
Yeah.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Definitely.
If I can't see that, if my only sense of myself as making it is being famous, when I know intellectually that isn't, you know, as I explained, just because I don't admire a lot of the famous comedians, and I admire a lot of comedians or bands or artists who no one's ever heard of, but I think are amazing. I don't admire Ed Sheeran. I just don't, you know. And I do admire the Dead Kennedys, who most people have never heard of and probably never made a cent in their lives, you know. So I'd be a fool if I said to myself, I haven't made it. I've been all over the world. I make a living doing something I love. I have made it, you know. But it's, as you said, I can't remember which one of you said it, but you know, it's like it has to be. I have to define the terms of making it. And it's a tragedy in the wider scheme. Like, society tends to reward fame and money as the arbiters of what's good, you know. And you know yourselves, you tell someone you're a comedian, are you a famous comedian? And that's, you know, their level of whether they think you're good or not. That's a frustration, but it's a sort of frustration one needs to kind of jettison. And I don't always successfully.
Well, I think that that's wraps it up, doesn't it, Matt?
I think so.
Is that the last one we had? Well,
been brilliant.
Markus, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate it. Where can the viewers and listeners find you on social media? I am on Facebook. I'm Markus Birdman. Instagram, I am Markus Birdman as well, or Markus Birdman -artworks. Has a lot of my artworks and stuff on it. So there's sort of little bits of video and bits and bobs on both those. Yeah, and are you? I mean, although with the current situation, I guess things are a bit up in the air still. But is there any gigs, tours, anything like that coming up? Well, that's it. I'm doing Sarah Millican's gig tonight, which I think I shouldn't have told you that. I think I'm supposed to tell you that after the event.
This video doesn't go out for a while, so you're fine.
Right then. I don't know if that's online for you to see in perpetuity. Hot Water have some of my gigs in their back catalogue, as do the Comedy Store. Sort of back catalogue stuff that you can access. I'm hoping to do, depending on what Boris says on whenever it is next week, I'm hoping to do the Kentish Town Forum on the 5th of December, which I'm really keen to do. So that Comedy Store and Live Nation are doing, because obviously, like they can put gigs that they would normally get 400 people in, they can put them in a bigger venue. So they've been doing the forum, and they had some of those gigs, and then obviously things got a bit shelved. But they normally hang it. The last one I think was, in fact, Eddie Izzard, and then sort of people a bit further down the food chain, such as myself, sort of supporting. I'm doing one of those with Bridget Christie as the kind of headliner, and that I hope that goes ahead, particularly because that venue is a venue that is very dear to me from seeing a lot of bands when it was the Town and Country Club back in the day. I don't know if you've been.
I've been to the Forum many times in the 90s. I can't remember exactly which gigs, but yeah, that's definitely one on the radar.
It's a very iconic gig that I've seen a million bands there. So I'm hopeful that I can walk those boards. But really, a gig in Bristol at Hen and Chickens on the 12th of December. But it's very few gigs. When I would normally be facing 25 gigs or whatever in December, I've got 3 that probably won't happen.
Well, fingers crossed that things are relaxed to some extent and things get the go ahead for you. But thank you once again for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Thanks, Markus. Good to meet you. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as we did. Don't forget, if you did enjoy it, please like, subscribe on whatever platform you're watching and listening on, because in that way you won't miss out on any future episodes we put out.
Yeah, and don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms as well. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and give us a follow, and you'll be able to keep up to date with all of the latest episodes and posts that we put out there. But thank you for listening and watching.
And we'll see you next episode.